This is Transformation Ground Control, your source for all things business, technology, strategy, and change. If you're growing your business, leading change within your organization, or undertaking any sort of operational or technology change initiative, this podcast is for you. This show covers what you need to know about digital transformation, organizational change, operational improvement, and business growth.
5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
And now, here's your host, Eric Kimberling.
Hello, welcome to Transformation Ground Control. My name is Eric Kimberling. I'm here with Kyler Cheatham. Kyler, thanks for being here again today.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Are you enjoying being a co-host, filling in for Parisa while she's on vacation? How are you enjoying this?
I am. Big shoes, right? But I'm very much enjoying our time together. So thanks so much for having me.
Yeah, thanks for being here. I'll be honest, it's a lot more fun having you on here than doing it by myself, which is what I did the episode or two before last week. So it's good to have a sidekick to bounce ideas around with. So thanks for being here.
Yeah, absolutely.
So
good to know I'm better than nothing, right?
Right. Yeah, that's not exactly what I was saying, but yeah, you're better than nothing and then some. So yeah, thanks again. But so we have an exciting show for you today. We're gonna cover a few different topics. We have a couple of guests we're gonna have on the show. Later in the show, we're gonna have Stuart Robb, who is the vice president of Third Stage UK, and we had about it was about a 60-minute Q&A discussion a few days ago. We actually filmed it live in front of a studio audience, although it wasn't really in front of a studio audience. It was just a live stream, but saying it was filmed live in front of a studio audience just sounds cooler. So we had a live Q&A where I had asked Stuart a bunch of questions, and as did the audience, about digital transformation strategies and best practices in general. And it's a really good conversation. So we're going to play you a clip, or play you that clip of that Q&A session that he and I had just a few days ago. And before we get to Stuart, we're also going to have an interview that Sarah Dokovich had with both Brian Potts and I. And Brian Potts is a managing partner and chief client officer at Third Stage. He and I were interviewed by Sarah to talk about cloud systems and cloud technologies and the pros and cons of cloud systems. So we're going to play you that clip here in a little bit. But before we do that, I wanted to talk a little bit or turn a bit to social media. And we get a lot of engagement and questions and suggestions for topics and all that good stuff on our different social media platforms, whether it be LinkedIn or Twitter or YouTube or whatever the case may be. So you've had a chance to look through some of the threads and some of the comments and questions and discussion that we've been having on social media in recent days. What are some of the things you're seeing out there?
Yeah, definitely. A lot of great dialogue, specifically following up after our Digital Stratosphere conference just a few weeks ago. And one of the things that we've really been seeing is what are some pros and cons of implementing a more niche system, such as a CRM system or an HCM system, versus a broader ERP system. Obviously, we know ERP is more expensive. It can take more time. And what if you're an organization kind of just needing that one system, but could benefit from a broader ERP system? Can you kind of take us through what that thought process may be, or any recommendations you might have?
Sure. So I think this is a good topic that's an ongoing debate and philosophical discussion that I don't know will ever be resolved. It's a lot like, the debate about, who the best sports franchise in history might be, or, who the best politician ever might be. No one's ever really going to agree on that. And I think that's true here for this discussion. But I think the thing that's important to think about this through, or the lens that's important to think about this through, is looking at it from the perspective of what are those trade-offs and pros and cons, and really, fully recognizing what those trade-offs are and being able to align those trade-offs with what your priorities are, and, using that as the filter for how you make the right decision for your organization. Just to give you a quick preface to my response, a lot of clients we work with, we'll find that the best of breed approach is the best answer, and we'll find other clients where that doesn't make any sense. They should be going with a single, broader ERP system. So it really just depends. A lot of organizations come in, when they hire us, they come in with the assumption that they're going to go with a single ERP system. But when you peel back the layers of the onion and get to know their business and their priorities and all that good stuff, you find that maybe that's not the right answer. So that's the first thing, is recognizing that there is no one good answer. There's no one size fits all answer. But the important trade-offs to think about are, obviously with a core ERP system where you're using one single enterprise-wide system, you're going to have a common user interface, a common system that you're all using, a common database, and the workflows are a little bit more integrated and seamless across the organization. So that can be highly effective for organizations that are really trying to drive more commonality and standardization as an organization. But a lot of organizations find that, hey, that's not really our biggest issue. We're not trying to drive commonality necessarily or efficiency. What we're trying to drive is maybe a little more flexibility and a better fit within each of the different areas of our business, in which case finding a separate CRM system or a separate human capital management or ERP, supply chain management, whatever the system might be or systems might be, those can be better fits in that regard. So I think it's a trade-off between two things. One is standardization, flexibility, and then the other would be the idea that ERP systems have a lot of upside advantage, but they also have the disadvantage of trying to be everything to everyone, which no one system is going to be. And as a result, most organizations find that they're making some sort of compromise by deploying a single ERP system. For example, what's the best answer for finance might not be the best ERP system for your sales group or your manufacturing group or whatever the case may be. So that's the sort of trade-off you have to think about. And then maybe another trade-off that's maybe not quite as important, but still something worth thinking about, is the level of impact that it might have, or this decision might have, on your IT staff. So if you're choosing best of breed, that's going to put more pressure on your IT staff to be able to maintain multiple systems, have a solid architecture, manage the integration, manage multiple sources of data, and you may or may not have the skill sets internally to be able to handle that. On the flip side, you don't have that strain with single ERP systems, but you have the other trade-offs, primarily from a change management perspective, that become more difficult with a single ERP system. So there's a few things that we typically advise our clients to think about in that decision.
Yeah, definitely. And so does it matter for the size of the company? You touched on resourcing. I think I always kind of assumed that ERP systems are needed by bigger global companies, and small businesses might not be able to afford that or might not have the resources to do that. Is that assumption, does that make sense? Or is that something that you kind of say a system really depends on the alignment of the organization and their goals?
I'd say it's a little bit of both and maybe some additional things as well. I mean, I'd say there's probably two opposite sides of a spectrum where you see single ERP systems be more common. You have the larger multinational companies where, to your point, they're big, they're trying to drive standardization and efficiency and commonality across the business, and usually those bigger companies have grown quite a bit over the years through acquisition and organically, and so they're dealing with all these disparate systems, and so they're trying to kind of push the needle over towards, let's just get everything under one umbrella, one system. And then on the other extreme, you have small companies, really small companies that are, say $5, $10, or $20 million in annual revenue. They're trying to figure out a good replacement for QuickBooks or whatever their base accounting software might have been. And in those cases, they're probably too small to deal with the complexity of all these different ERPs or these different best-of-breed systems. So a lot of times they're good candidates for single ERP systems because, they usually haven't been around as long, and so the processes aren't as mature, and it's easier for them to change and adapt to the software. B, they're usually not as complex because they are smaller, so a vanilla ERP system can oftentimes work better for them. And C, they usually don't have the IT staff to be able to support multiple systems. It's really the mid-market, when you get into like the bigger small companies and the mid-market, maybe even the smaller big companies, that's the space where the needle can really go either way oftentimes. And a lot of that just comes down to how complex you are. If you're a complex, diverse organization, you're going to be less likely to find a good, solid single ERP system. But if you're a larger or mid-sized company that has fairly standard processes that aren't that unique in many ways, then a single ERP system may make more sense.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And one of our audience members had another kind of deep philosophical question about what is the difference between digital transformation, that kind of sounds like a fancy word, and ERP implementation. What are the key differences between those that clients or our audience members should consider?
Yeah, I'd say first and foremost, they don't necessarily need to be either or mutually exclusive. It could be that you're implementing ERP and you're doing an ERP implementation, but it's part of a broader digital transformation. But in general, I view ERP implementations as sort of a back office focused, efficiency focused technology initiative that's focused on getting a core backbone in place for an organization, which has benefits. It can drive efficiencies and reduce complexity and whatnot. I view digital transformation as more of a, hey, we're going to totally rethink how we do things. We're not just doing an incremental ERP upgrade or replacing an old ERP system for a new one. It's more of a, let's rethink our business model, let's rethink our organizational design, our culture. So it's a little bit more of a bigger change, I would say. That's probably the easiest way to think about it. And it's important for clients and organizations to really understand what exactly you want to accomplish. And it's okay to do either one as long as you're all focused and aligned on that same, you're all heading in that same direction. Too often, companies expect a digital transformation as something more material, as far as changes of their business, but then they end up with basically just replacing what they already had, and which would have been okay if that was their intent from the start. But then you end up with people, not being on the same page with what that's going to look like. So I think getting that alignment on, is this an incremental upgrade or is this more of a transformative type of change is important. And a lot of that's going to be driven by your industry. If you're in the retail industry, for example, or food and beverage, we're seeing a lot of food and beverage organizations that are going through a lot of growth right now, especially post-pandemic. So they're sort of being forced into more of a transformation, whereas other industries, maybe they have the luxury to choose between, do we want to make more of an incremental change, or are we a bit more risk tolerant and we're willing to take more of a leap in the whole transformation? So those are some of the things that come to mind for that.
Yeah, all good stuff. One of my last questions is, I loved this one on your YouTube channel. Obviously, you're a main thought leader in the industry when it comes to digital transformation. And one of our audience members had a question on kind of what type of ERP-focused books or other resources do you consume, to stay up on trends, or what does that look like for you? I mean, as working with you as a colleague, I know you're constantly, innovating and looking at new ways to bring this information to your audience. But I thought this was a super interesting question, if you had any recommendations on other resources.
Yeah, that's a great question. And I don't know if I have all the answers. I don't have all the answers for that, but I can tell you what I do myself. What I find to be helpful is, first of all, most of my consumption of ERP and digital transformation specific knowledge, most of that is through experience and with clients, and the writing and the thought leadership we provide and our team provides. So a lot of it's sort of collaborating with our team and learning from our own team and our clients. That's where I sort of consume the knowledge I have on transformation itself. But so when I read and when I try to really, quote unquote, educate myself in a way that's sort of outside the realm of day-to-day consulting, I usually end up reading, first of all, I don't read fiction. All I read is nonfiction, but it's usually more like business focused. I usually don't read about, I'll read a little bit about technology trends at a high level, but I focus more on reading stuff about business and change and leadership. So for example, I mean, some of the books I've really enjoyed over the years are like Good to Great by Jim Collins is one of my favorite books, or there's a lot of business strategy type books I'll read. I read Harvard Business Review a lot. So I tend to read more of the, call it just general strategy stuff, and I try to apply that general high level stuff. I try to apply it to what we do with digital transformation. And a lot of that stuff is very relevant. And I think my advice for people that are trying to learn more about the industry is to not only think about technology and what's happening with blockchain and machine learning and the cloud and all this stuff that's happening that's fun to learn about. You need to know that stuff, but I don't think enough people really look outside their own immediate industry. So in other words, just looking at stuff like, reading a book about project management or change management or strategy or whatever interests you that's sort of outside the realm of, the immediate technology, but could still help you be a better consultant or transformation practitioner. So those are some of the advice that I would have. But Yeah, Good to
Yeah.
Great is that's definitely one of my top five favorites. Even like In Search of
Yeah.
Excellence from the '80s, that's an old book, but I really like it, and I think it's still relevant today. There's a book about McKinsey 7S model that I really enjoy. I don't recall the name of it, but that was a good book as well. So there's a lot like that I typically read.
Yeah. Maybe you should write a book or start a book club,
You're
and
you're
then we
hitting
can
a
share it on.
Yeah, the book club. Yeah, that's a good idea. You're hitting a sore spot because I've wanted to write a book now for about 10 years and I still haven't. So I probably maybe I'll read a little bit less and start to write a little bit more. That might
Yeah.
help me along there.
Yeah, definitely. Well, good. Well, we'll definitely invite this user here on YouTube to your book tour because they
Yes,
obviously
my
are very
worldwide book
interested
tour.
in that. So,
Right.
seems like now is the time. But as we kind of transition into our episode today, we've gotten a lot of questions about cloud ERP and kind of what that transition looks like for our industry. We've done a lot of blogs and videos on it, but I'm interested to think or hear your feedback on if you are considering a cloud ERP system or function or anything like that. What are some like maybe top 3 key considerations that that you should be aware of in going through this process?
Yeah. So the first thing, I always like to start with the bad news, get that out of the way first, is that you have to recognize that cloud systems in my opinion, aren't all they're cracked up to be. I mean, the industry is definitely going that way. There's no doubt that in a few years from now, most, if not all, software vendors are going to be deploying their technology through the cloud, and most organizations at some point in the near future are probably going to be consuming most of their technology through the cloud. So it's not really a matter of questioning the viability or the trend of cloud, but I think the key is to recognize the dark side of it and the risks of cloud, because it's too easy to get lulled into complacency or lulled into this state of utopia that isn't necessarily true. And it's important to recognize a few things. One is that regardless of what industry analysts and other consultants will tell you, cloud systems do cost more in the long term for the most part. I know software vendor sales reps hate when I say that. They tell me, no, you were wrong. It saves money because now you don't have to have the IT infrastructure and you don't need all that staff. The reality is okay, some of that is true, but you're also paying a higher subscription fee annually for eternity. That payment's not going away. It's a lot like leasing a car versus buying a car. When you lease a car, you've got a sweet new car every couple of years, but you also have a sweet big payment every month that you're making. So that might be all right. That might be the right answer for you, but you just have to recognize it for what it is. You are paying more money for cloud systems in most cases. So it's going to cost you more. And probably most importantly, when it comes to implementation, the implementation isn't nearly as easy as cloud vendors will make you think, because on the surface, yes, I could log in right now and I could probably go to NetSuite's website or SAP or someone, or I could talk to someone and probably within 24 hours, I could probably get immediate access to an instance of their software on my computer. So in theory, you think that's great. That's going to be so easy to deploy. It took me 24 hours to get access, and I'm in there. I can start messing with stuff now. But the reality is, when it comes to implementing for your business, cloud technology generally doesn't help that. It doesn't materially help that process along any faster or cheaper. So you still have to go through the grunt work and the hard work of changing processes and changing people. And that's the part that is most difficult for most organizations. Plus, things like on the technical side, you still have to configure the software, you still have to do data migration, you still have to do all these different things that cloud doesn't really fix. It might be the best deployment option for now, but it's not necessarily going to save time and money in the way that software vendors will try to convince you. So those are a few things that, I don't know if that was 2 or 3, but that's a handful of things consideration to have when you're thinking about cloud technologies.
Yeah, definitely. And it sounds like you and Brian are really going to dive into the details with Sarah in just a bit here, right?
Yep. Yeah, absolutely. So we're gonna take a quick break, and when we come back, we're gonna keep building on that thread there and talking more about the pros and cons of cloud technologies and cloud systems. So as you're thinking about your digital transformation journey or your technology journey, you can be aware of what those potential strengths and weaknesses and pitfalls are. So we'll take a quick break. We'll be right back with more Transformation Ground Control.
If you are aiming for transformation success, turn to Third Stage Consulting Group. Third Stage's independent and technology agnostic consulting team helps clients define their digital strategies, define their roadmaps, and manage their transformations. With offices in the US, Europe, and Australia, our team helps the world's most forward-thinking organizations through their transformation pitfalls and risks. If you are embarking on a digital transformation or business change initiative, contact Third Stage Consulting to see how we can help you reach the third stage of transformation success. Learn more about us and download independent reports, videos, and other best practices at thirdstage-consulting.com.
Welcome back to Transformation Ground Control. My name is Eric Kimberling, here with Kyler Cheatham, and we wanted to shift gears a bit now and continue on the thread that Kyler had brought up right before the break, which is this whole concept of pros and cons of cloud technologies and cloud systems. And for that, we actually had Sarah Dokovich, who interviewed Brian Potts from Third Stage, as well as myself, just to talk about some of the good, bad, and the ugly about cloud systems. So for those of you that don't know, Brian is a managing partner and chief client officer at Third Stage Consulting. So he's been with us since the start, since day one, and he knows the industry really well. So he and I are going to respond to some of Sarah's questions about cloud. So we'll turn it over to you, Sarah.
Eric and Brian, welcome to the show today.
Hi, Sarah. Thanks for having us.
Of course. I'm excited to have both of you on today. It's going to be a fun discussion. So before we dive into the specifics, I'd love to discuss the evolution of cloud computing with you guys. You have both had careers that span 20 plus years in this industry, and you've each watched the most popular software vendors make the transition from the very beginning. So when cloud technology was first introduced, did you guys think it would soon take over as a prominent solution for businesses in the years to come?
Well, maybe I'll take a first cut at that. When it first happened, there was a predecessor to cloud back in the early 2000s. Maybe it was in the late 90s, right early in my career when I was first starting out, and it was called ASP was what it was called. And it was sort of a early version of cloud where companies would host their solutions offsite in some other location, and it just had a different name than what we call cloud today. And for a while, for a short period, I remember there being a lot of hype behind ASP, and it never really got traction, and people seemed to really like their client server on-premise type of systems at the time. So it might have just been a movement that was a bit ahead of its time. So it had kind of come and gone one time already, and then it kind of emerged again in the, call it around 2010 or maybe a little bit after that, where a lot of companies were starting to migrate to the cloud. And I've always been a bit of a skeptic with cloud, only because I felt like it was more the vendors that were interested in moving people to the cloud because it was more recurring revenues, higher profits. There's a lot of reasons why they might like the cloud solutions. And I was always skeptical of whether or not it was really the best fit for organizations implementing ERP. But over time, as more and more vendors were investing heavily in cloud and putting a lot of R&D dollars in it, and we're actually rolling out viable cloud solutions, it sort of, I think, reached a bit of a tipping point within the last few years. And even more recently with the COVID-19 pandemic, that's really further fueled the transition and fueled that tipping point where a lot of organizations are dealing with remote workforces that can't all be in the same location all at one time. So cloud solutions are much more viable or important to them. So I don't know that I necessarily knew when or how or if cloud adoption would happen, but being independent and technology agnostic, we've just always questioned and challenged the notion that everyone needs to be in the cloud or that cloud is a perfect solution. So it's more a matter of just making sure that clients understand the pros and cons of cloud. Mm-hmm. What are your thoughts, Brian?
Yeah, I was also in the independent space at the emergence of the cloud, and anytime there's new technology advancing, there's really two camps. Some are all excited what's coming, those that jump on the bandwagons, and then there's always those that lag behind and are pessimistic and don't trust that anything's ever going to take off. So in the independent angle, we don't want to lean too far in either direction. We want to lead our clients to the right direction. So I think we were proceeding with caution, and keeping an open mind, but certainly I wouldn't say we foresaw what's come now in the called a almost full immersion of the cloud.
Yeah, it's great to see how much technology can evolve in such a short amount of time too. And now, although it feels like we have arrived in the kind of cloud era, if you would, it's without a doubt that these technologies will only continue to evolve and improve over time. But looking at where we are today, there are definitely some software solutions that are more mature in their cloud capabilities than others. So when a company is considering opting into a cloud ERP solution, what are some key factors that will help someone identify the level of maturity that the software has acquired in their migration from on-premise to the cloud? Who wants to go first? Anybody?
I can take a first pass at it here. I think the first thing to look at is how long has the solution actually been in the cloud? So, for example, when you look at, if you compare a product like Oracle's NetSuite, that's a product that's been around for over 20 years and it's always been in the cloud. So any R&D dollars and investments they've made in that sort of functionality has been in the cloud. So you don't really have the issue of, is the cloud technology mature or not, because they've just always been in the cloud. And the same is true for Salesforce on the CRM side, and Plex is another one that's more of a manufacturing, shop floor automation, supply chain management type of ERP system. But beyond that, if you're looking at systems that didn't originate in the cloud, which quite frankly is most systems did not start in the cloud, they started off as on-premise type solutions. It's helpful to look at how long have they been moving to the cloud, when did they start the journey, when did they start migrating. But probably even more importantly, it's important just to look at your business requirements and really understand what is it you need and want from the system, and really dive into those potential systems to make sure you really understand what you're getting in that cloud solution. A lot of times companies or vendors will try to sell you on their roadmap or forthcoming capabilities or forthcoming rollouts that are going to include certain functions that they don't have now. And you want to be real careful with that, because there's no guarantees that functionality will ever come. And the other thing you want to really dive into and fully understand and kind of smoke out is, a lot of vendors out there have their flagship cloud solution, but because it's not complete yet, they also have other systems that they're still using from their legacy environments that are on-prem, that they're using to bolt on to that cloud solution to kind of patch together, a cloud core, but then there's on-premise systems handling some of the other capabilities. So you really want to understand, when a vendor shows you something or is proposing a solution to you, really understanding what really is in the cloud versus something that's going to be a legacy product that I'm just going to have to upgrade later on.
Yeah, there's a misconception or misunderstanding sometimes on level of complexity across different systems. If you look at some of the bigger systems, take SAP S/4HANA, trying to move from their ECC roadmap, or look at Oracle ERP Cloud. These are monstrous systems that are navigating in time to the cloud, but there's a whole lot sitting in legacy, which makes it a longer, more difficult transition to the cloud. There's a reason that the original cloud solutions and the majority of things like CRM and some accounting packages are in the cloud. Is that because they're not as complex? They're easier to rebuild into a cloud environment. So when you're looking at the complexity that you need and the depth of what's actually in an ERP system, that should be a big part. What Eric mentioned, a big part of your evaluation is, what do they truly have available in the cloud, and how are they going to fill in the gaps for any other areas?
Okay, interesting. Now, would you say that in some cases companies could be better off sticking with on-premise software solutions instead? And what scenarios would make the most sense to avoid the cloud and stick to the legacy solutions instead?
Yeah, I think the easy answer to that, and I'm curious to what Eric has to say, is if you're already on-premise and you haven't defined a clear need to go to cloud, there might be no reason to do so. If you've got the infrastructure set to manage your own systems, you've got the in-house capabilities, and you've got a need for a robust system, and you've got the structure for it, that might be a reason to keep it in-house, because that transition to the cloud, it's a different mindset. restructuring. You've got to not only change the way you manage things, but the way you handle your systems, the way they're supported, and a whole number of steps to take.
Yeah, I agree with that. And I think the thing I'd add is that, you don't really know, there is no one size fits all answer. I mean, we don't really know for any given company we first work with, we don't know right away whether or not cloud's going to be the right solution for them or not until we better understand their business needs and requirements. And you also have to look at things like Brian talked a little bit about cost and that sort of thing, but you also have to look at risk and what the risk tolerance is for your organization, your willingness to change as an organization. That's another thing that people often underestimate, is that if you have a culture of highly tenured employees and you have some really old legacy systems that have been around forever and they've worked fairly well, it's just going to be harder to transition away from that, even though the technology is arguably better and it's going to be more sophisticated and longer term might be a great fit. It's still going to be a big jump for a lot of organizations. So I think it's really important to recognize that risk, that there are risks, and fully vet that out and understand kind of what are the pros and cons of staying on premise versus going to the cloud. And I guess the other thing I'd say is, even though the tipping point is clearly upon us right now, and there's still more companies using on-premise systems, but more and more of them are adopting or changing to cloud systems. And maybe in 5 years from now, we won't even be having a discussion anymore about on-premise. I don't know. But I guess the word of caution is that, I've seen a lot of these trends and pendulum swing back and forth, and trends come and go. And who knows, especially the way the 2020s are shaping up so far, who knows what's going to happen in the world of technology, and is there something better that comes along? Are we overemphasizing cloud? Could there be some big security breach in the future that would cause companies to want to scale back and go more on premise? I have no idea. So those are just the kind of things, I guess we don't want to get too caught up into what we think the future is going to be, and everyone's doing something that involves the cloud, so therefore we should. It's really just more important that we as an organization look at what's best for us.
Yeah, absolutely. No one size fits all, kind of, by the sounds of it too. And Eric, you put out a video about the dark side of cloud ERP that I want to touch on. And in that video, you discuss different parties that have had a special interest in pushing the ERP software industry to the cloud, and from investors to vendors to the media, basically. So can you tell us a little bit more about the impact these interests have had on the industry, and what that means for companies considering cloud solutions in their software selection process?
Sure. So the whole premise of that blog post was just to sort of uncover and show how the ERP ecosystem works. And that's part of us being independent. Brian and I and the rest of our team at Third Stage can navigate that maybe a little bit more realistically, just because we understand the biases and the things that happen behind the scenes. But just to simplify what I was saying in that blog, is that software vendors, especially when they're trying to launch or get traction with a new cloud ERP system, they spend a ton of money, not just on R&D, but they also spend a ton of money on marketing and making sure that people want to move to the cloud. And part of how they do that is not just by trying to sell directly to organizations looking for new ERP systems, but they also hire industry analysts to do quadrants and reports and things that show how great their technology is and how important it is to be in the cloud. You have consultants out there that are towing the same line, and then you also have a lot of blurred lines between industry publications and blogs that are putting out truly independent content, but a lot of that is also being sponsored by software vendors. So we get calls all the time with people asking to give quotes for some kind of article they're writing or report they're writing in the media, but it's being sponsored by a vendor, and they have a certain angle that they're trying to chase down. So it's just important to recognize that despite the fact that analysts and vendors and media is all saying everything's great about the cloud, everyone's going to the cloud. If you're not in the cloud yet, you're dead. You read a lot of those real extreme positions out there, and you just have to recognize for what it's worth. It's just a marketing machine meant to get more people to move to the cloud so they make more money. And not to say that's right or wrong for you, but it could be right or wrong for you. So you just have to figure out what the best approach is. So that was really the point, is just to understand those nuances of the industry and to really try to cut through it and take it all with a grain of salt, because it all is very biased. And like Brian and I have been saying, it depends on what your needs are.
Yeah, absolutely. It's so interesting. And it helps really peel back the layers and dig deeper into what the driving forces have been in this transition to the cloud. Now, when we come back from a quick break, we're going to dive deeper into the specifics behind the good, the bad, and the ugly when it comes to cloud computing.
If you are aiming for transformation success, turn to Third Stage Consulting Group. Third Stage's independent and technology agnostic consulting team helps clients define their digital strategies, define their roadmaps, and manage their transformations. With offices in the US, Europe, and Australia, our team helps the world's most forward-thinking organizations through their transformation pitfalls and risks. If you are embarking on a digital transformation or business change initiative, contact Third Stage Consulting to see how we can help you reach the third stage of transformation success. Learn more about us and download independent reports, videos, and other best practices at thirdstageconsulting.com.
I'm Sarah Djokovic speaking with Eric and Brian from Third Stage Consulting. So let's dive into the advantages and disadvantages of cloud ERP solutions. So obviously there are pros and cons that come with nearly every solution. Can you speak on the broad advantages that a cloud ERP solution can bring to an organization that they may not see if they stick with a legacy on-premise software?
Well, I think the first ones that come to mind are, first of all, your upgrades are going to be handled more behind the scenes, and you're going to be more likely to keep up with emerging technologies and advancements in technology without having to take time out of your operations to go do a more formal upgrade or re-implementation as companies used to have to do in a pre-cloud environment. There's also, I think for a lot of systems, not all of them, but for a lot of them, especially the systems that have been cloud-based for a long time, there's a sort of a user interface, look and feel, ease of use type of advantage that a lot of these systems have. There are some cost savings or benefits to potentially be had with not having to build out a physical and organizational IT infrastructure to support a big on-premise type of deployment. So those are a few of the cost savings, if you will, that come to mind.
Yeah, one thing I've been talking to some clients about is the integration with what we'll call emerging technologies. Not that you can't do it with on-premise, but there's an ease of access and constant development and integration when you're talking cloud platforms, when you're talking about access to data, usability in some cases of that data, sharing of data. Opens up some risks as well, but one thing you want to look at is where you're going as an organization. Where is it? I think the general theme here is, where are the vendors, per the earlier comment, and tying to the dark side, is where are vendors putting their efforts and money? It is in the cloud. It is on the emergence of those newer technologies, so they tend to integrate a little bit better as a whole.
Okay, that makes sense. Now, let's reverse this. What general disadvantages would a cloud ERP solution introduce to an organization that they may not have experienced if they were to stick with an on-premise software?
Well, the two biggest ones that come to mind are, first of all, the relative lack of flexibility of cloud solutions. So with on-premise systems, for better or for worse, you were able to customize the software and change it to do what you wanted it to do. With cloud solutions, you don't have quite that flexibility, because especially in SaaS or software as a service types of cloud deployments, which is different than a hybrid cloud solution, where you are in a hybrid cloud solution, you would have just an on-premise system, but it's installed somewhere else in the cloud, but you could still customize it and do what you want with it. Whereas software as a service is what they call multi-tenant, to where multiple companies are using that same software. Your data and everything is isolated, segregated, secure, but you're using the same software, and there's fairly limited changes you can make to that software because it's being used by hundreds or thousands of companies and users. So that lack of flexibility is one that is underestimated in terms of what the risk and pain might be to go along with that. And the other one that comes to mind, or the other disadvantage that many in the industry don't want to talk about, is the cost. You'll get sales guys that insist the cloud is going to be cheaper in the long term than on-premise, and that's simply not always true. In fact, I would argue that I don't have data to back this, but it could be that it's the inverse, and it's actually more expensive for a lot of organizations. I don't know if it's a majority or not, but we see a lot of organizations that end up spending more with their cloud solutions because, yes, maybe they got rid of some servers and staff that they didn't need to support the system longer term, but now, much like leasing a car, you have this ongoing annual subscription fee that's never going to go away. So it's a lot like leasing versus buying a car. In some ways, when you buy a car, you can do whatever you want to it. You can paint it. You can change it. You can add new rims or wheels or whatever you want to do, and eventually you pay it off, and you don't have a payment. You just have the ongoing maintenance. But with a lease, the downside of a lease is that you can't change the car, you can't paint it, you can't change the way you got it, and that payment goes on forever, at least until you get another lease. So, to me, the cloud is a lot like the leasing option, where it has its advantages. It works for a lot of organizations, but there's also a potential downside or trade-off that companies have to make too.
That's a great comment. We get calls from a lot of clients who have just gotten to the contract phase, thinking, "Oh, sweet, we're going cloud," and then they realize what it's actually going to cost. They actually run the scenarios, and finally the CFOs get involved and say, "Hold on, what are we talking? Year over year." There's expanded costs around integrations, things that you don't foresee. The support costs when you're bringing in these external parties increase. You're offloading the potential internal cost, but it doesn't go away. So it gets sent around, and probably multiple parties externally out, the integration parties, and that's an ongoing cost too. If you're tying to your web portals and all that, it tends to accelerate beyond what people initially think when they get that. If you're going online looking at what NetSuite or Microsoft Dynamics it costs as a SaaS platform, be a little bit cautious of that, because that's just the very base cost and doesn't really look at reality.
Yeah, that makes so much sense. And that's actually really relatable to what I'm even going through right now with my own online software research for certain things. I'm like, oh, I see. So over time, this will be actually more. And even though it might have some benefits, but at the same time, they are almost the same thing. So always really important to do some research. And based on everything you've touched on, it seems like the answer to whether one should pursue a cloud-based ERP solution or an on-premise solution is truly just unique to the organization and their specific needs. And when a company is just starting out on their digital transformation, should they include both cloud and on-premise software solutions to their shortlist? Or are there things that they can do to determine whether they should go one way or the other before they start meeting with vendors?
Well, it's becoming more and more common over time that it's getting harder to even find on-premise solutions that are still out there. They do exist. There are systems that you can get that are on-premise. In fact, some vendors have both. They offer up cloud offerings, but they also offer an on-premise deployment still. But I think over time, that's the scale's tipping towards more cloud, because ultimately what vendors want is they want to have one cloud solution to be able to support, so they can dump all their R&D dollars in that one solution and not have to worry about managing multiple systems. For the most part, some vendors, there's exceptions because they have distinctly different product lines. Like Oracle, for example, owns NetSuite, and they also own Oracle ERP Cloud. I don't foresee them merging those two systems together, but those are so big and they've got such big install bases, they can kind of survive and coexist together. So I think the question becomes, do you want to look at vendors that have the option for either cloud or on-premise? So in other words, if you're not sold on cloud and you think you might want on-premise, then the question might become, well, maybe I just focus my short list on those vendors that give me the option to do one or the other. It's going to be hard to find many vendors, if any, well-known vendors that are strictly focused on on-premise and don't have a cloud solution, just because that's, like I said, where the industry is going. So I think that's probably the best way to handle it. But even in those cases where you're looking at vendors that have either deployment option available, you just have to think about long-term viability. And is that, if I go with an on-premise option, is that really going to be around in 5 or 10 years? Is the vendor going to cut that off and eventually say, I have to move to the cloud anyway, and so should I just go to the cloud now? Those are the types of questions that in discussions that we get into oftentimes with our clients.
Yeah, what we're seeing more actually in recent discussions is those organizations that have on-premise, and they're wondering, is it time to move to cloud? And really what the decision is coming around is it worth sticking with a solution that works and looking at building sort of a best of breed to fill in missing functionality? And those best of breed solutions, by the way, are pretty much always cloud, not all, but generally cloud, versus let's upgrade everything and get to the cloud now. I think that's a more common scenario that we're looking at. And when is the time right to rip and replace? The general thoughts around that are to run a business case. Just to go to cloud because everyone's saying you have to, or because your vendor says you have to, is not a good reason. But if you're starting to see pains in the business, if it's looking it's time to replace your ERP, if it's looking like you need cloud advantages for some reason, then would be the time to start looking at and make sure that it's cost justified to make that jump.
Yeah, awesome. This is all super informative, you guys. Thank you so much for sharing these insights. Now, if listeners want to learn more, what are some resources that you might suggest for them?
Well, in addition to subscribing to this podcast, I would also suggest going to the Third Stage website. That's the company that Brian and I work for. And we're an independent consulting firm, as you mentioned at the intro. And we have a lot of independent technology agnostic resources out there, blogs and white papers and videos and things of that nature. So if you go to thirdstage-consulting.com, that's a great resource where Brian and I are posting constant blogs and videos and that sort of thing, as well as other people from our team.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Eric and Brian. We're about out of time, but again, thank you so much for being here today and just sharing all these insights with us.
All right. Thank you, Sarah, and thank you, Brian, for being on the show. A good conversation. It was good to sort of replay that interview for our audience here and learn a little bit more about what some of the pros and cons are. And again, the whole idea here is that we're not suggesting that cloud is good or bad, but just like any analysis or discussion we tend to have on this show or the Third Stage that we have as an organization, we always want to recognize what the risks are, and any hot new trend or any new direction that the industry might be headed may be a net improvement overall, but even if that's the case, you still usually are trading one set of risk for another. So in this case, hopefully we've given you some things to think about and just be aware of, because I think one of the biggest challenges with cloud deployments or any sort of technology transformation is if you go in with unrealistic expectations or a bunch of blind spots, not knowing what to expect, that creates a bunch of problems later on because you don't have a realistic plan or budget or risk mitigation framework. And so hopefully that's helped to uncover that. So we're going to take a quick break and then we'll come back and we're going to bring on our next guest, which I'm excited about, which is Stuart Robb. And we'll do that right after the break. You're listening to Transformation Ground Control. We'll be right back.
If you are involved in any sort of digital transformation or business change initiative, you will want to download the 2021 Digital Transformation Report. With its comprehensive overview of business and technology trends and best practices, this report is a must-have guide for any transformation project or executive team. Download this free report by visiting Third Stage Consulting at thirdstage-consulting.com. You can also visit our website to learn more about us or download independent reports, videos, and other best practices. Again, visit thirdstage-consulting.com today to learn how to take your transformation to the third stage of success.
Hello, welcome back to Transformation Ground Control. I'm here with Kyler Cheatham. You can find us every Wednesday on YouTube, Pandora, Google Podcasts, Apple Podcasts, wherever you listen to podcasts or watch podcasts, you can find us. We go live and premiere every Wednesday morning, U.S. time. And I'm excited for our next guest. I'm always excited for our next guest. I've had him a few times on here. Kyler, you and I have worked with him on a number of events over the years, and I would consider Stuart not only the head of our UK office and our European office and our European client base, all are sort of serviced by he and his team in the UK, but he's also a very entertaining character. Would you agree with that? He's fun to talk to.
I would absolutely agree with that. No offense, but he is my favorite third stage stakeholder to watch to present, because you never quite know what you're going to get. So he's always, brings the fun, I would say. Yeah,
absolutely. He does, and he has a great sense of humor, and he's extremely smart. I mean, he's one of the, everyone on our team is smart, but he's someone that, he's one of those few people where you feel like, wow, I could be learning from you, even more so than I already am. And there's a lot of good advice he has just from being in this space for so long. And he's worked for some of the big consulting firms, as well as obviously now Third Stage and other smaller firms in his years or decades in the industry. So it's a good conversation. We had this Q&A that Stuart and I facilitated on a live stream a few days ago, and we'll do these stand-up sort of pop-up Q&As. We just started it in this instance just to get a live audience and to get some more interaction and engagement and questions from the audience. So we cover a lot of ground in this interview. It started off as more of a general transformation best practice discussion, but there's a lot of different side ramps we took in that discussion along the way.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, such an interesting opportunity to be able to answer questions live. And I know Stuart did a lot at our Digital Stratosphere conference. He did a presentation on new frontiers in technology, where we talked a lot about AI and machine learning and how that kind of integrates into the next step. So definitely check that out. I learned a lot. You can go to our website and watch the day one of his presentation. So highly recommend that. But to kind of set the scene, Eric, I wonder if I might just ask you, why did you feel like you needed a specific presence for Third Stage, or a kind of an influencer in the European region? We also, just for our listeners, we have another VP in our Asia Pacific region as well. But I wonder if you might talk a little bit about that structure and that global footprint that Third Stage has to kind of precurse this conversation.
Sure. Yeah, there was a couple of reasons. One is that first and foremost was that our client base was sort of demanding it, or there was a need for it that we recognized in the market. It started really with our North American clients that had a European presence in other parts of the world. But as we grew as a company, this is we've been in business now for just over 3 years, or we just celebrated our 3-year anniversary. But after we had been in business for probably about a year, we were finding that we were getting a ton of demand from outside North America. So people, particularly in Europe as well as Asia Pacific, were reaching out asking if we could help. And so we just decided, given my relationship with Stuart, that it might make sense to open an office in the region to help service the North American clients that needed help with their European subsidiaries, or their European-based companies that wanted sort of local support there. So that was really the impetus for opening that first international office. And then when we had the opportunity to open the office in Australia to handle Asia Pacific, it was the same kind of thing. We were just seeing a lot of demand for services in that region, and they wanted to hire someone who is not one of the big five, one of the big large consulting firms, but they needed someone who was big enough, had a global enough of a presence to be able to service their diverse needs. So it's really a way to accomplish that greater vision of being a good alternative, a good independent technology agnostic alternative to, the Deloittes and the Accentures and the big system integrators of the world.
Absolutely. Well, you can't get more authentic than Stuart Robb. I would guarantee that for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. Or, people always say that, they appreciate how honest I am and how I'll just say it, how I think it is. That's nothing compared to what Stuart does. Stuart almost has no filter, for better or for worse. He almost has no filter. He'll tell you exactly what he thinks and what the risks and pros and cons are. And he definitely holds no punches for sure.
Yeah, and can you give us kind of a high level of some European projects he's worked on, or some kind of a different footprint of where all of his clients are throughout Europe, just so we kind of understand, is it just in the UK or is it truly all of Europe?
Yeah, it's a great question. We actually have one of our clients in Europe is a very large multinational food manufacturing company based out of France, and they have operations throughout Europe as well as North America and other parts of the world. That was one of the first clients that we sort of went through our process with, or one of our service offerings with. We also have right now we're also working with a large healthcare organization that is sort of dual headquarters in the U.S. as well as in UK. They have operations in Ireland and other parts of Europe as well. So that's another client. We also have a number of clients throughout Europe that are part of private equity groups. So private equity owned organizations. That is an area that he is very good at, or he and his team are very good at servicing those private equity owned companies, and a lot of the thought leadership that Stuart puts out is related to private equity, mergers and acquisitions, and that sort of thing. So yeah, there's been a lot of different companies ranging from really high growth mid market companies to big multinational global organizations. So it's been a good mix.
Yeah, definitely. And I think Stuart is doing a private equity boot camp actually coming up later this month on the 21st. So if you're on Crowdcast, definitely head over to our profile and you can register for that. It is a free event. So definitely a great thing to check out. But with that, I'll definitely pass it over to you and Stuart to kind of get into that deeper dive into that Q&A.
Yep, that sounds good. Well, let's do that. Let's cut it over to the interview that I had with Stuart recently. We'll take a listen here. My name is Eric Kimberling. I am here with Stuart Robb. Stuart, thanks for being here today.
It's good to be with you, Eric.
So maybe just real quickly, we're going to dive into some questions here in a second I want to talk about transformation best practices in general. So this is meant to be a sort of a 20,000 foot strategic view of transformation, digital transformation. It might be a little bit difficult to distill 25 plus years of your experience into, some of these best practices and lessons that you have, but we'll take a stab here at it. And, but before we do that, maybe just give us a quick introduction. Where did you come from? How did you grow up in this space?
Yeah. Well, I started in IT in 1984. So I think that well over 30 years, maybe even getting up towards 35. And so I started an IBM mainframe, which is what I call proper computing. And it wasn't until about 1997, 98, where I really started getting involved in ERP and CRM. That was with Anderson Consulting, as was before they turned themselves into Accenture. And I did a few years stints in various consulting firms. I went on to Ernst & Young as a executive consultant in ERP, and then on to Capgemini in Australia, where I was leading their transformation consulting practice. So I've been doing ERP since about 97, 98, so I guess that's about 25 years. But what's interesting as well is that, I've worked with a lot of the tier one firms, and the methodologies that they use are actually quite similar. They come in and they'll all say they've got these great methodologies, but actually when you cut it right down, you find that a lot of these methodologies are actually quite common, and they're really common sense as well.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. And I want to get to that here in a few minutes and talking about some of the trends we're seeing with system integrators in general, but maybe just to give us a sort of a starting point flyover view of the digital transformation space. What are some of the big trends you're seeing in the space here, especially in more recent years? I know a lot has changed in 25 years. You and I started around the same time in this industry, but just in more recent years, what are some of the biggest summary of trends that you're seeing?
Certainly, obviously COVID has been an interesting time. It's almost put a pause and a break on the essence of digital transformation. I mean, it's what I call a cyclic business. So every firm will go through a transformation or a digital refresh, usually upon a 10 or 15-year cycle. Now, the ones that don't, the ones that have 30 or 40-year-old systems, tend to be the outliers. So you'll get a system that, is SAP, ECC5, or maybe it's still R3, and the company will have decided that it is time that it needs to be refreshed. The technology just can't support what the business needs to do. It can't support that level of automation. And so it'll be time for a change. And so what you see is that there's almost, the same names come up over and over again. So a great example of that is HP, who did a massive SAP project in 2003, 2004. Had some fairly major problems with that, but managed to get it in the end. And then they did it again in 2017 as they started to split HP up. And again, they had some problems. So you see these kind of companies, they come up on a recurring basis. Now, what happened in COVID was that all slowed down. So the number of companies surfacing say, we're going to make this big investment in a technology refresh, those big projects, we saw a slowdown in them, but actually now it's starting to come back. And we're starting to see some larger companies again saying, it's time to update, it's time to refresh, it's time to improve. And if you think about it, that's common sense, because over the course of 10 or 15 years, your processes are going to stagnate. People are going to become institutionalized. Bad ways of working are going to become embedded, and data is going to get less and less clean. So having the proverbial 15-year spring clean on your technology and making use of best practice is a pretty sensible thing to do.
Right. Now, what about technology trends for these companies that are going through the cycle every 10, 15 years? A lot changes technologically in that amount of time. In more recent years, and with our current clients, both in the UK office where you're based, in North America and other parts of the world that we have a client base, what are some of the big, the more recent technological trends that people should be aware of as they enter their digital transformations?
I think, obviously we're seeing a big rise in the use of chatbots on websites. You can always argue whether these are really, modern technology, because a chatbot is basically just a database of questions that it's managed to accumulate where it happens to have got the right answer. And so that goes into the database. But certainly language, neural networks for natural language processing helps those chatbots make intelligent sense of questions that you ask. So that's quite a modern trend. We're seeing stuff in predictive analytics as well. So airlines are starting to use predictive analytics to preempt maintenance on aircraft, particularly engines. So Rolls-Royce are making big strides going from preventative maintenance to predictive maintenance. And of course, then in the ERP space, certainly in AP, OCR has been around donkey's years, but it's really only in the last few years that you can really make it work and actually use OCR to do three-way matching of invoices. And then in accounts receivable, again, predictive analytics to say who's likely to be a bad payer and what can you do to prevent that. Those technologies are now surfacing and starting to get into client footprints.
Right. Yep. And then when you look at predictive analytics and artificial intelligence, it made me think of robotic process automation. That's another technology that seems to be being baked into enterprise technology providers like SAP and Oracle and those guys. How is that? How have you seen some of the things you just mentioned, as well as AI or robotics? How is that in reality being integrated into modern enterprise technology? Is it sort of a pipe dream that will happen someday, or do you see our clients actually using that technology now?
There are instances of RPA I mean, RPA is just a super word for screen scraping, which we used to use in the 90s. So it's not as fantastically super duper as I think everybody might suppose it is. It's just a fancy word for being able to, yes, manipulate an old system, using a tool that can, figure out what that system is and process a transaction. The interesting thing about IPA is it's not nearly as ubiquitous actually as some of the AI systems that we've talked about. I mean, a lot of organizations are using OCR technology for invoices, they're using chatbots, as I mentioned, and other stuff. But really, RPA to some extent is a problem that's is a solution that's still looking for a problem to solve. And when I talk to clients, they're not really saying, "I think what we need is an RPA tool to uplift our capability on this ERP." They still say, "I need to get rid of this ERP. I need a complete refresh. I need to sort the data out. I need to get the processes right." And they'll still think of the $100 million+ ERP project rather than the 10 million or 5 million RPA project.
Right. Yeah, and that's a common dynamic that seems to be there, where you have companies that just two things. They want to, first of all, just replace their old system because they have to in many cases, but also so many organizations don't necessarily need or want to swing for the fences to go for the really big emerging technologies. They just want to make some incremental improvements to get there. Now the question is, can you do that in a way that's not overly cost prohibitive and still gives you an ROI? That's the big
it's interesting. One of our clients, in fact, some multinational clients, US and UK based, they brought us in about 3 years ago to do a finance transformation, and the whole essence of their finance transformation was to replace their ERP, an old version of Epicor, get rid of it, put a new one in, and everything in our garden would be rosy. And the problem was that actually when we started analyzing what pain points they were having and where all their issues were, almost none of them were related to a functional deficit in their ERP. Nearly all of them were either upstream data problems or poor process. And so, the whole tenet of their transformation was founded on the fact that this new ERP was going to solve all their problems. But actually, there was a huge landscape of change that they could do before they even worried about their technology. And in fact, the smart play there was to clean the data landscape, was to to improve the process landscape, was to upskill the people, and then do the technology last. And in fact, that's what they've done. And even to the extent that they haven't actually bothered replacing the core ERP, because there's no business benefit that comes from a system that adds up and takes away numbers and produces a set of financial accounts. That's very, very uninteresting. And so what they've really spent their effort is in the boundary systems. And as I said, they've used products like High Radius to massively improve their accounts receivable and day sales outstanding. They're using Proactis to deliver improvements in accounts payable, so vendor self-service and things like that. And so they're really targeting their transformation and their technology uplift on those places that are really going to give them high benefit. And not every company will do that. Some will just say, let's clear it out, get rid of the whole lot, start again. But this company's really taken the transformation as what it probably ought to be, which is a pure business transformation that thinks about the whole ecosystem, people, process, technology, data, information security, that whole thing. And they're saying, how do we optimize across all of those dimensions, not how do we replace some technology and hope we get a bit of spin-off benefit in terms of improved processes and self-service reporting.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. So maybe shifting gears a little bit, and we've talked about emerging technologies and sort of where enterprise technology is headed, and that sort of utopia of great new technologies. In some cases, in other cases, it's just the same technology with better names than we've seen in the past. Which there's a lot of repackaging of the same stuff that tends to happen in this space.
Yeah.
But in general, maybe moving away from those trends a little bit and just talking more specifically about the actual transformations themselves. What are how would you summarize, and I know this is a very tough question to summarize, but how would you summarize some of the most important keys to digital transformation if someone were just starting out or is in the midst of a transformation right now, thinking about transformation? What are some of those things they need to be aware of, just to make sure they focus on these 3 or 5 things or whatever it is?
Yeah, I was going to say, how long have you got? Because we could speak about that probably for the next 48 hours. This could become the world's longest podcast. It's funny you said about repackaging. I mean, I always loved the idea that we've got this real good cloud computing, inverted commas, whereas 10 years ago, 20 years ago, they call it application service provider. And, 15 years ago, it was distributed computing. And then 30 years ago, it was mainframes. And so the same terminology, the terminology changes, but the same core basic techniques are the same. In a mainframe, I had all my applications running in a machine at the center, and I had a screen access, sat in front of me accessing a mainframe. Well, now I'm on the internet and I'm using a screen accessing the internet, and I'm logging on to applications that are hosted in a data center. So everything that comes around is never new. It's just the same thing repackaged with slightly better graphics, in my view, but there you go. Important keys to digital transformation success. I think the answer to that is, if you're starting it, it's easier to start it right and keep going than it is to start it wrong and then try and fix it. That's the first thing. So anything that you do when you are launching a transformation, you really need to have either really good advisors or really good research, and see what the common failings are. I would say the best things that you can do at the beginning are be very clear about what your vision is for your transformation and what it encompasses. So what is the scope and what is the outcome going to be? Very clear, crisp answer to what the outcome of the transformation is going to look like. The second thing is that a lot of people leap straight from there to going, well, how do I replace my ERP? Or how do I replace my HCM platform? Or how do I replace my CRM? And actually, it's much more effective to break your business problem down and to start looking at areas where you can improve from a business perspective, and then create a series of projects or initiatives and prioritize those as things you should go and do. Now, it might be that some of those are technology, but it might be that some of those have got nothing to do with technology. They've got, they're operational changes and changes in the org or training or whatever they are. But too many organizations take the big step going straight from, we want to improve our business and we want to improve our cost to serve and we want to, increase our automation in our business. And all of a sudden, the next thing they're doing is talking to, Deloitte or Accenture or somebody saying, how do we do this? And they miss out all that target operating model and value proposition and initiative prioritization and all the other stuff that they should do first. And clients have a tendency to do that. They get into the RFP, and then when they start to talk to the SI will say to them, well, hang on a minute, have you done this, and this, and this? And they'll go, well, no. And so then they'll have to do a huge, big reverse gear to try to get back to the point at which, they should have come out of that vision stage, really being clear. And of course, they've gone through this huge procurement. They've decided on Oracle, or they've decided on Salesforce, or they've decided on this technology. And now the SI is saying, well, what are you going to do with it? And it's all very, well, here's our 7,000 requirements. No, we don't mean that. What's going to be better? What's the outcome? And, so there's ways of doing that. And so if you can get that right, that's going to really, really help you. So do the steps in the right order. The second thing is make sure that you have a partner or an advisor or a contractor, I don't really care who it is, but who really, really knows how to do this stuff and really solid. because most organizations think they can do this. But even when you've been part of a project team that has done the ERPs or transformations before, there's a very, very different skill set to running one of these than there is to being part of it. And we find organizations that get lost quite early in the process because, you know, they've seen the swan or the duck gliding along the top of the water, but they haven't seen what paddling goes on underneath to make that a smooth process. And so, you know, there are actually not a huge pool of people in the world who really know how to do these transformations effectively. And quite a lot of them are soaked up by the tier one consulting firms anyway. So, you know, you really have to select your support if you want to be effective. And I think too many organizations realize they don't have the knowledge, but get too far down the road. And then again, have to do a lot of reverse gearing. So you asked for 5. I would say if I was going to give you the top 2, those would probably be the absolute flashing neon signs.
Yeah. And those are good ones that actually, if you do those couple things right, that actually leads to a bunch of other things that will probably fall into place more likely than if you hadn't focused on these 2 things. One thing that you mentioned that I just want to build on a little bit is the first point you made around the planning and just making sure you have a clear vision of what you want out of the project and how you're going to get there. It reminds me of an interview we did on this podcast with James Hayward, who I know you know very well. He's the CFO of a client of ours in the UK that you've worked very closely with. And one of the comments he made in that interview, you know, we were talking about a project that I believe was I can't remember if it was either 12 or 18 months. It was a round number like that.
Yes, 12 months.
12 months. And I was asking him, he was talking about the importance of planning. And I asked him, how much of that 12 months did you spend on planning versus the actual execution of the transformation? And he said it was well over half. I mean, he was saying it was well over half that time was spent planning, preparing, getting the
and planning never stops, right? You know, like the business case never stops, because if you're going to create a plan, then as you move through the plan, things are going to change, more things are going to manifest themselves. You're going to get knocked off course, you know, by the prevailing winds. And so you have to continually keep on top of the plan and make sure that you're always sailing towards towards Southampton and not going to end up in the Gibraltar or some, you know, place like or southern Spain or something. So you know, I think there's a temptation to have a plan and think that is the plan and hold on to that plan, even when it's absolutely patently self-evident that the plan is dead and it's not going to get delivered. And so being more adaptive and more agile and say, okay, well, this has happened. We now know this, you know, what does that do to us? And how do we steer back towards where we were aiming for? It's just a good discipline. And again, it's one that organizations, I don't think, do terribly well. And the second aspect on planning as well is around planning at the right level. So again, I go into too many organizations, the same organizations that tend to deliver up 7,000 requirements for an ERP, of which 6,900 are the same as every other organization, also tend to overplan. So what they will do is that rather than allowing the people that they hold accountable to deliver parts of the project and to run their own plan, they will create these super complex master plans. The worst one I ever saw was 25,000 lines in a Microsoft project plan using enterprise project. And it was useless. I mean, nobody bought into it. Nobody really understood it. When something changed over here, it would change that over there. Nobody understood how or why. And it took months to build this thing, and it was an absolute monster. And within, I would say, probably about 3 months, the thing was absolutely useless. No, you know, completely out of date. Nobody was keeping up to date. And so we, again, advocate very strongly. You have a mid-level plan that as a program manager, you can visualize and see what's going on without having to get right into the weeds. So we think you can hold about 150 odd work packages in your head, you know, in a visualization at any one time and react to those. So plan to try to get to a point at which your granularity is about 150 active activities. Yeah, because if you're trying to manage 4,000 active activities, you're just going to fail.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. And it's that balance between focus and, having the amount of focus you need, but at the same time addressing the complete business problem or the business needs, and knowing that you're not going to boil the ocean overnight. And you're not going to solve the world's problems overnight. That's a key balancing challenge that a lot of organizations seem to have.
I think as well, to be honest, as a program manager, you're one person and you're carrying the execution and the delivery, on your shoulders. And if you're going to try and micromanage every work stream and every work package, you're going to fail. You're lining yourself up to fail before you start. So actually, the way to manage a program, particularly if it's a large transformation, is to not do that. It's to try and lead. Yeah. So as long as your feedback loop is, are you on your plan, Mr. Accountable Person? Yes or no? And if the answer is no, what is that issue or risk that's impacting you, and what can we do about it? Is a much better conversation to have than to be saying, on line number 6,922, you were supposed to deliver it by this date, but you actually delivered it by that day, is a value-free conversation. And so, again, I find particularly those who are newer into ERP program management, they tend to take their project management hat and try and expand it up, rather than changing their style and becoming much more of the leader and much more support and direction, rather than task management and micromanagement.
Right. Yeah. And it seems like too, one of the other phenomena that we see with a lot of clients in the spirit of talking about that planning and kind of focusing in on this planning thread that we're on right now, is when a client first decides what their new technology is going to be, and they've made a decision that, yes, we're going to implement whatever the solution is. There's a certain amount of momentum you have in the project. People are excited. Usually that's about as good as momentum gets, unfortunately, in the whole project, is when you make that decision that, yes, we're going to do it. We got approval. Now we're moving forward. It's all, I hate to say it's all downhill from there, but that's the peak of excitement. And then you add to the fact that your vendor and your system integrator is typically pressuring you to say, hey, you're excited. We're all excited. Let's get going. And then they throw a bunch of resources at it. And suddenly, you wake up the next day, you've got dozens of consultants potentially there on the meter ready to help you out, but you're not ready. You haven't gotten your own ducks in a row and done the planning. You haven't defined what you want to be when you grow up, but yet you're paying by the hour now with those resources.
Yeah. And that's really common. I think I wrote a blog on this a couple of years ago about being ready with your homework before you do the exam. And it's precisely that. I'm really quite firm with clients that there are some prerequisites that they have to have in place before they you're going to tell the SI their preferred vendor, and you can tell them that, we're going to enter into terms with you and blah, 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 blah. But what you don't want is a, dozen consultants sitting there waiting to start, and you've got no team. And the team that you have got have just joined, and they don't know what it's all about, and they don't know what their role is. You are far better putting all of the pieces of your jigsaw in place first, so that the people on the team know what they're supposed to be doing. They know what the program's all about. They know how you've got to where you are before you get the SI on board, and then they're ready to start having workshops and do whatever, and you're prepared. And, as you say, a lot of time and money, particularly in the early parts of design, are wasted because the SI is ready to go and the client team isn't. Actually, it's a big lesson is that it's quite common that any SI or any, in fact, consulting firm is almost always able to go faster than the client. And the reason for that is because the consultant or the SI's pure focus is on the program. whereas you get matrix management, matrix resources. You get resources that come on, don't know what they're doing. You get resources that come on and then roll off again. There's that churn where you don't get that continuity of knowledge. You don't necessarily get first go right in terms of skills. They don't come along with the collateral. Again, there's simple things. The number of times that I say, do not go into design and implementation before you've got your SKU model sorted out, before you really documented your price book, because the SI will sit there and say, can you tell me what your price book looks like and what your discounting model is? And they won't have it because nobody's looked at it for 10 years and it's not written down. And so they will spend 3 weeks, 4 weeks writing the SKU model or writing the price book while the SI is sitting there waiting, charging for them. And those are easy things to sort out without the benefit of £50,000 a week going out the front door to the likes of the tier 1 SIs.
Yeah, that's a great point, and it's super easy to be lulled into thinking that in order for us to meet an aggressive timeline and an aggressive budget, we need to get going now. So there's a temptation to say, well, if we do what Stuart says, which is to plan and to define our processes up front, then we're going to slow things down and we're not going to meet our timeline. But the reality is that helps you speed up. And that's something James talked quite a bit about, is how fast the project was able to go once they had that solid plan in place. So I think that's one thing that a lot of organizations miss out on.
Yeah, I think the other thing as well is, the SI's role in life is to generate fees and profits for the partners, right? And so the SI will be keen to get as many warm bodies onto the client site or charging the client billable time as they possibly can. And actually, in some circumstances, 80% of those people are not going to add any value for 6 weeks or 8 weeks or 10 weeks. So you are better throttling and managing the SI so that you're getting the A-team leadership, experts to structure the program properly through a mobilization and then early parts of design, and then getting people on later, where you're getting into more detail. The same is true of decision making. The temptation in an ERP is to want a decision, to need a decision, therefore to make a rapid decision. Now, actually, if you built your plan around that, what you'll do is almost certainly make lots of bad decisions. And what happens is that as you get into build and test, particularly when you get into UAT, all those bad decisions will come back to haunt you. So what you really need is, for those key decisions, you need sufficient time to acquire a reasonable data set on which to base a decision, and then a reasonable amount of time, at least a day or two, to reflect on it and to coalesce your thinking before you make it. And too often you'll sit in a meeting and over and over again, we need a decision on whether we're going to use this integration or not. And they'll go, because it's going to take this long to build and we're recommending de-scoping it. And you say, if you're any good, well, what happens if we de-scope it? Oh, nothing, it'll be fine. And then 6 months later, you find you've de-scoped it, and all of a sudden half your reporting suite doesn't work because you just haven't done that piece of work properly. You haven't thought it through. You've made the decision in a rush because the program is held up whilst that decision is being made. But then all it does is add time later on because you've gambled red when the colors come up black.
Mm-hmm. Right. Yeah, it's a good way to look at it. And, it's even worse, I think, is that, or at least just as bad as what you just described, is the other option, which is we'll just let our system integrator or the software determine for us how that a certain process is going to look. And then you end up. Yeah.
I think the other thing that's that if I wanted to characterize a key success factor in these, and it's something that I've always been really lucky with, is surrounding yourself with good people and people that you trust to be able to take the accountability and to make decisions and to make informed decisions and to run their part of the program without you having to constantly intervene or them constantly coming to you. The most successful programs that I've been on, I've often felt sometimes actually I don't need to be there because they're all just getting on with it and they're all really focused. And I'm just sitting there doing the status meeting and orchestrating, conducting the orchestra a bit, but everybody knows their instrument, everybody's playing beautifully, and that's fantastic. And so if you can create that team, your likelihood of success goes up considerably. And I think what also happens is a lot of organizations disaggregate their accountability to the SI. And unless you are closely managing the SI, you're not going to know what the SI is doing, and you're not even necessarily going to know what assumptions or decisions they're making. And so, again, it's very easy to lose control. It's very easy to lose the picture on these programs. And that's why, it was funny. I was having a conversation today. I was saying, I do tend to rehire people I've worked with before. And the reason I rehire people I've worked with before is because I know them. They know how I think. They have worked with me previously, and they've clearly been successful at what they do. And so why wouldn't I rehire them? Because, they've already proven themselves in what they do. And I know that, may not be the most politically correct thing that we're supposed to say these days. Everyone has an equal chance. But the truth of the matter is that if you're putting people on it and you don't know them and you find out that they're not capable of doing the job, then you're going to waste time, you're going to waste money, you're going to waste DSI's time and money. And really your sole objective in delivering these transformations should be to maximize your chances of success. So whatever tactic or technique you have to do, whether it's, tight vendor management, whether it's good recruitment, whether it's selecting the right team members from internal, ring fencing people that you want, not sharing them, all of that stuff, each little, success attribute that you put onto a program will increase your chances of success and make you more likely to come out of it as the hero rather than the goat, as Charlie Brown used to call it.
All right, we're going to take a quick break. We're going to pick up this conversation with a lot more audience questions and more topics we're going to cover. But we're going to take a quick break, and we'll be right back with more Transformation Ground Control.
If you are aiming for transformation success, turn to Third Stage Consulting Group. Third Stage's independent and technology agnostic consulting team helps clients define their digital strategies, define their roadmaps, and manage their transformations. With offices in the US, Europe, and Australia, our team helps the world's most forward-thinking organizations through their transformation pitfalls and risks. If you are embarking on a digital transformation or business change initiative, contact Third Stage Consulting to see how we can help you reach the third stage of transformation success. Learn more about us and download independent reports, videos, and other best practices at thirdstage-consulting.com.
Welcome back to Transformation Ground Control. Thanks for listening here today. You can find us every Wednesday. We premiere on YouTube, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, or wherever you listen to podcasts. Now, we were in the middle of a interview that I had with Stuart Robb from our team talking about digital transformation, best practices, and lessons sort of in general. It was meant to be a strategic flyover, if you will, of some of the things to be thinking about as it relates to transformation. And we also had a number of live questions that we took from the audience during this recording. So the second half of this session, we want to queue up for you, and we'll just cut straight to it from here. We had a question that I wanted to that came in through LinkedIn while we've been talking here that I want to cover. And this is from Krishnan Kaushik. And he's asked, don't you think that the cycle of tech transformation or digital disruption is getting reduced with each passing decade? With current trend, it looks like highly competitive markets will have to go through multiple transformation efforts in consecutive years. If this happens, then how can a company manage transformation initiatives and help their employees adopt technology without any confusion? So I think getting back to the human side of things along, combined with the rapid pace of constant change. So how do you balance that?
Yeah, I think that I think that's true to a certain extent. In other respects, I think it's a misnomer, and I think it's a misnomer because the technology companies will be pushing you and wanting you to recycle and refresh because they'll get more money out of you. I mean, it's quite simple. And the SIs will love you because you're constantly refreshing. As I said before, if I take a very cold, hard look, an accounting package adds up and it takes away. And even if I compare an accounting package from 1980, a COBOL one, to one from 2015 or 16, they're not doing anything substantially different. Now, you might disagree with me, and I'll tell you a little story, which was I had my daughter around at the a couple of weekends ago, and she's about 12, and she's doing computer studies at school, and she was raving on about all the latest tech. And I said, if you strip away all of the surrounding graphics and excitement, we're doing the same thing that we did 30 years ago. And to prove it, I went onto QuickBooks and I created an invoice, and I they had the VAT number and the address and and all the rest of it, the line item and the item code and what have you. And I created it, and I was able to save the invoice, and I was able to send it to the dummy company that I had set up. And there you go. It was in my QuickBooks. It was in my database. That's it. Thank you very much. And then I went over to my very old Apple II, and in BASIC, I wrote a little program that would capture the company name, the company address, the VAT number, etc., and it would save it to a floppy disk drive as a text file. And I could retrieve the text message and I could put it on the screen, and there it was. And it was no different to QuickBooks. Now, okay, it wasn't as sexy, and it didn't have, you couldn't, use drop-down lists and things like that, although I suspect if I'd been minded enough, I could have worked out a way to program drop-down lists in BASIC, probably not been the best use of my time. But philosophically, it was doing the same thing. Now, what it couldn't do was it couldn't draw nice graphs showing me what my sales per quarter were or my sales per month. And it couldn't do, my percentage revenue of, France versus UK or anything like that, because that part of the technology has moved on. But the core of an ERP or accounting system hasn't. And actually, those do not give you any business benefit at all. A core accounting package, whether it's SAP or Oracle or NetSuite or QuickBooks or, my little basic program that I wrote, gives you no competitive advantage. Okay, the stuff that does give you competitive advantages is the higher level layers. So it's the things like the sales order processing and order management stuff and the fulfillment stuff, the manufacturing processes and the materials management and purchasing management. It is the accounts receivable automation and AI. And actually, the business case for replacing a core ERP is actually pretty weak. If your sole objective is to replace your accounting package with a new one, then the only reason you've really got to fall back on is technological obsolescence. It's so old that the vendor's not going to support it and it's going to fall apart. In order to get real benefit, it has to be the peripheral applications, the boundary layer applications, and they're going to change all the time. And that is just part of the normal process of life. So that's why I say, in answer to the question, the number of companies that will replace a core ERP with all of the disruption that comes with is never going to be every 2 years. I mean, Vodafone, O2, GlaxoSmithKline, whoever they are, whether they're on Oracle, Sainsbury's, Tesco's, whether they're on Oracle or SAP, they're not every 2 years going to be going, well, actually, I've decided I don't really like SAP. I'm going to take it out and I'm going to put Oracle in. That doesn't happen. What they're going to do is to say, actually, we've got this new product or service that we're going to offer. And within the core of our Oracle or SAP platform, it doesn't do exactly what we want. So we're going to buy this additional piece of technology that does do what we want, some kind of customer experience portal, whatever the thing is, and they'll bolt it on the side. Now, in 10 years' time, SAP and Oracle might offer that as part of their standard product. But, let's be honest, NetSuite and Microsoft Dynamics still do not have any native capability to OCR an invoice. You have to go and buy a separate product from the App Store. So, the idea that the core enterprise operating system, the enterprise engine, needs regularly replacing, I think is not correct. But I do agree that the peripheral will always change, and that is just the normal business as usual, the stuff that enterprises will go through.
Right. Yeah. Couldn't agree more. Here's another question that's interesting. Actually, we got a couple here. I'm going to choose one. Let me go back to this one.
I'll give shorter answers if we're getting a lot.
Yeah, they're starting to roll in here.
Okay.
So the question I wanted to get to here is, where is it? Bear with me. Can Stuart please advise on best practices to develop a business case for a replacement or upgrade of an ERP system?
Yeah, I can. That's a very long subject. We should do a podcast on this on its own, but I can give you some pointers. First of all, building a business case bottom up is quite a lot harder than building a business case top down. One of the first places I start with business cases is to look at what the key drivers of the business are and what data we have available to look at those key drivers. So let's take an example. Let's say that the goal of the program is to improve finance efficiency. So the first place, which is a really easy long division, is to say, well, what's our total revenue and what's finance's cost to serve as a percentage of total revenue? Now you can look that up on averages by industry on the APQC, and that will give you a benchmark. So the average benchmark for all companies is about 2%. So if you do your calculation, and it's a very simple calculation that you can do just by looking at the annual accounts, you can divide the finance cost by the revenue. And if you're at 3% or 4%, you have got 1% to play with. And you know that because every other company can make it do with 2%. So there's got to be a reason why you're more. And that then allows you to start drilling down to the next level to say, okay, well, where's that cost leakage? It's usually in headcount, right? Let's be honest. That's where most companies spend, particularly in back office functions. So if you're looking at headcount, you can say, okay, well, how much is my AP costing me? So what is it, if I do some division, what's my cost per invoice processed or my cost of vendor setup compared to the industry average? And again, that gives you somewhere to go that starts to give you comparators that say, we are not efficient and this is how efficient we should be. And therefore that block of money is available. And so that should be the aim and target of our business case. And then you can build the future state operating model that underpins that financial objective. Now, that's an easier way than trying to say, well, maybe we can shave a head over here and maybe we can shave another head over there. That's quite a difficult, or maybe we can shave, maybe this person can spend a bit more time doing this and a bit less time doing that. That's quite a difficult way to build up a business case. And actually, usually it's not credible either. Usually people will go into that micro level detail or pull it to pieces and say this business case is rubbish. Whereas if you're doing it from a benchmark perspective, that becomes infinitely more powerful because you've got the answer. This is what everybody else does. We're not doing it. There you go. There's the profit we're leaving on the table.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. And I think a couple of things you point out that are super important. One is that the need to look at benchmarks and look at, reliable agnostic benchmarks. It's easy to go to, SAP or Oracle or Microsoft and ask them, how much money am I going to save if I deploy your technology? And they're going to give you a big magic number that you probably don't want to hang your hat on, or certainly you don't want to bet your career on. And that's one thing. The other thing too, that I think maybe just backing up even more, is I think the fact that we're talking about a business case is important, because a lot of times, even now, especially now, and the way the industry is going and the way so many organizations are being forced into changing their technology, they neglect the whole business case, because they say, well, I don't have a choice because SAP is making me upgrade to S/4HANA, or Oracle's making me upgrade to Oracle Cloud or whatever. So even if you are being forced, or you feel like you have no other choice and there is nothing really to justify, you still want to have that business case, right? From a
you need to know what you're in for, right?
Yeah.
You wouldn't go to your bank manager and say, can I have £100,000 loan? And then he'll go, why? And goes, oh, well, because car's getting a bit old. I mean, you're going to need something a bit more than that, to get him to shell out $100,000. And it's the same with a business case. You need some, good paperwork behind it. Otherwise, it's just sunk money.
Yeah, absolutely. Agreed. Now, here's a question that's quite a bit different than what we've been talking about so far, but I think it'll be relevant to a lot of our audience, particularly those that might be in consulting or interested in consulting. And this question is, hello, sir, can you talk about the growth of a functional consultant? So maybe just talk, I know that's a very broad question, but maybe you can hone in on just maybe as a consultant in general, what does a career path look like? And I don't know if you want to tie it back to your career path or what you've seen our own team develop.
I mean, my career path was probably a little bit unusual from consultancy, because I didn't come in as a consultant into a firm and start from scratch. I actually came in as an associate partner because I'd already run a company. I was already so I was subsumed into Ernst & Young. And so probably my experience isn't terribly useful, but if you're going to grow in consulting, there are two attributes you need. Firstly, you need to be expert at what you do, and you need to really be solid and confident, and to some extent assertive as well, to make sure that you're making a positive contribution, but that the clients that you're talking to can rely on you and trust you and want to work with you. The second thing that you need to do in consulting is, if you're going to be effective, you need to be able to communicate with people, and you need to be able to build a rapport with people. So you'll generate, as you get more senior and as you do it longer, you'll get more gravitas, and as you get more seniority, you'll get more gravitas and you'll get more charisma in the role. But that's something you have to proactively build. Now, there are all sorts of there are hundreds and hundreds of things that will help you do that. Barbara Minto on the pyramid principle around how to communicate with senior execs. That's 101 consulting. There are some good videos actually on YouTube. There's a guy, one from an ex-McKinsey consultant, and even I watch it because I actually think some of the stuff he has to say is actually quite interesting. And then the third thing is, and unfortunately this is the thing that a lot of people struggle most with, is that you have to know how to understand a problem from a client and come up with a proposition that will solve that problem, and then be able to sell it. And a lot of people don't think that consultants are salesmen. And if you are a partner in a consulting firm, you are absolutely a salesman. And so, again, a good background in negotiating techniques, contracts, anything that you can do in your consulting career that can get you out of your box and supporting something that is a little bit left field. Though, if you can get yourself onto a bid team, if you can help work with the negotiation team, whatever it is that builds your width of experience will make you more attractive as you move up the seniority grades.
Right.
That gave a few insights there.
Yeah, and a follow-up question actually from a different person who. So obviously this topic is of interest to a few people on the recording here today. But the question is, how do you balance specialization with being useful starting out?
You be useful. Absolutely. If a friend of mine's daughter has actually just joined PwC as an actuary, and she was getting quite frustrated that she was being asked to make the coffee for the partner and what have you. And I said, no, that's a good thing. You're getting into the partner's office, you're communicating with the partner, he'll be imparting pearls of wisdom, things that he happens to be doing. He'll be giving you work directly rather than going through all of the layers. Trust me, that's the best thing you could be doing. And so, the specialization is important, but it's the well-rounded consultant that's going to go up the quickest. So the more you can get involved with, the more you show that you're proactive, you're keen, but not grasping and desperate. You still have to be part of the team. But partners want somebody that they can rely on. They want, again, like the client, they want somebody that they can trust, they can give something to, they know it's going to be done, it'll be done right first time. You won't do everything right first time. You'll make a few missteps. I've made a few horrendous howlers in my career. Sent the whole margin spreadsheet to the client once, which I thought was going to get me sacked, and as it happened, the margin wasn't in it. But that was a kind of disasters that will befall you. But the firms will tolerate that, because if in the whole you are a go-to individual, because you've that width and depth of skills and experience, and you get on with everyone. That's what they want, and that's how the best people and the people who go fastest up the chain are the ones that are the best networkers.
Right. Yeah, that's sound advice. And I think that's a challenge too with being in consulting. I think it's always a challenge between not only specialization versus being useful, which don't necessarily obviously need to be two different things, but there's also the whole balance of specialization versus breadth. And I think the challenge with what we do as consultants, especially in the transformation space, is that you need to have some specialty, but you also have to be able to see the big picture, or else you get, you're not nearly as.
There's another more immediate consideration, which is a mantra that I've always used, which is everything that I've ever learned, I know is going to go out of date in about 5 or 10 years. So I can program in BASIC, I can program in COBOL. If I had to, I can run a sysgen on an IBM mainframe. And that skill set to me at the moment is absolutely no use whatsoever, but I can still do it. So, I have reinvented myself approximately every 5 years for my entire career. Now, as you get older, it gets much harder to keep reinventing yourself technically, because you just don't have the brain capacity that you had when you were 20 to start learning about non-fungible tokens and, Bitcoin programming and Python, cryptography. You can't do that because you get older. So you make a transition from knowledge and skill into slightly more esoteric, client relationship management and program directorship and things like that, which rely more on your people skills than your technical skills. But nonetheless, yes, absolutely, you've got to be a good all-rounder, but you have to be known for something. Yeah, it's no good being a consultant and say, well, what does he do? Oh, he's just here, that's no good. You've got to be known for, you need to speak to him about if you need some help on SAP or whatever it is.
Right. So I guess to wrap up then, and maybe one last question that'll sort of pull all this together and maybe even summarize some other things we haven't gotten to. But what if you had to summarize for someone that is about to start a transformation, either they're an executive on a project team or at an organization about to go through a transformation, or they're a project team member, or maybe they're a consultant that's about to enter the space, what sort of high level advice would you give to someone that's just getting ready to start out on the journey here?
You should be able to give an elevator pitch on the outcome of the program. and you should be able to do that to anyone at any time, within 10 floors. So you should be able to talk about the program, what its purpose is, what outcome, what benefit, within about 30 to 45 seconds. If you can't do that, you will struggle to be able to relay the big picture to anyone else. And so my strong recommendation, when you are starting, your mission, your vision, your strategic imperatives, all of that stuff is really, really important to crystallize. And the way that I recommend doing that, as well as kind of having that elevator pitch, is to have some form of narrative, some kind of day in the life of, that you can say how it's going to be different to everyone. The board, the chief executive officer, the SI, the tools vendor, the colleague who uses the system on a day-to-day basis, the colleague who uses it ad hoc once every now and again, whoever it is, the client, the customer, whoever it is, have that real clarity in mind as to what it looks like. Because if you can communicate that effectively and everyone can understand it, everyone will get behind it. If you can't, you're finished before you start.
Right. It's great advice, and it gets back to that sort of vision and clarity and planning, and that seems to be the theme of what we've talked about here today, is the importance of that. So I appreciate that feedback. Well, thank you, Stuart. Thanks for being on the show here today. Really appreciate it. Appreciate everyone listening in here, and we'll look forward to seeing you on the podcast again very soon. And if you want to reach out to Stuart or any of our team in the UK, especially if you're a European-based company or if you have European resources that want to reach out, we'll include your contact information, but they can also connect with you on LinkedIn and other channels, I assume.
Yeah, well, actually, I hate Facebook with a passion you can only just about imagine. So don't look for me there. But I am on LinkedIn. And obviously, you can email me at stuart.robb@thirdstage-consulting.com.
Yep, and we'll include a link to your email address below. And you can also reach out to me as well, and look forward to seeing you all soon. Thanks again, Stuart, for being here.
Okay, great. Thanks a lot now.
Everyone have a great day. Take care. Okay, well, hopefully you've enjoyed that session here today. Hope you found that informative as far as the Q&A with Stuart and I on transformation best practices. That really wraps up this episode of Transformation Ground Control. Kyler, thanks again for being here.
Thank you for having me.
Absolutely, and we'll hope to have you, maybe you and Parisa both on some of the shows going forward. Now that she's coming back as we speak from maternity leave, so we can start to see a little bit of her face as well. And we will look forward to that. So we'll see you all next week. Hope you have a great week, and thanks for listening to Transformation Ground Control. We'll see you soon.